All right, I'm sure we'll have a few more folks hopping in, but we'll go ahead and get started with some intros and announcements. We have some housekeeping items. But thank you all for taking time out of your night to join us here at our Monday Guest Speaker Series. My name is Shannon Sheehy. I manage the careers team for CodeU. So I work really closely with our career coaches and our tech employer specialists who are here to help you all get jobs. So definitely recommend if you are beginning to start your job hunt, or if you're thinking about it, or maybe you've been a student for a while and you're about to graduate or you have graduated, definitely get in touch with those folks. If you're not sure who your career coach or tech employer specialist is, feel free to DM me and I can get you connected to that person. Before we get to our speaker tonight, just a couple announcements for everybody. So we do have more speakers lined up in coming weeks. Next week, we have a talk on Agile and Product with Steph Hogan. And the week after, which is March 11th, we have a talk on AI tools and how to use / not use them, which should be really interesting. Our careers team is working on a lot more engaging events, so keep an eye out for those. We have an industry night event coming up in Louisville next week, March 7th. We have posted some information about that. There's also an in-person event on March 6th, which is next Wednesday in Lexington. We are not directly involved with it, but our tech employer specialist for that region, David York, is going to be in attendance. We've sent out communication about that to all Lexington area students. You should have gotten an email last week and you should get a reminder tomorrow. But that's a really cool free event that you can check out. We're also working on more hiring events, demo days, career days, things like that. If you have any ideas for events or companies you would like to be connected to, please let us know. We can't guarantee we can make those things happen, but we always try to work with companies that you all are actually interested in. Final reminder, if you are attending as part of your career readiness requirement, which would apply to folks that started their session in August. January folks, this will come in play for you in a few weeks after you choose your pathway. So if you're an August session person, please remember to fill out the form in your Google Classroom to get credit for attending. A couple housekeeping items. Please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation so we can cut down on some background noise, but please feel free to use the chat for questions and comments. We'll be keeping an eye on that, and we can stop our speaker if we need to address anything, and we should also have time for some Q&A. So with that, we are joined tonight by Matt Hensley, who is a mentor for the program. He's been with us quite a while. Matt is going to present on soft skills for engineers. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matt. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining. Yeah, soft skills for engineers. So this is just going to be not so technical, more about good practices and things that I've learned, and more importantly, things that I've seen really effective coworkers employ and I picked up on over time and wanted to share. All right. So about me, Matthew Hensley. I'm a senior software engineer at Grafana Labs. If you're not familiar with Grafana, we make observability tools. So probably most famous for the Grafana dashboarding tool, but we're also the principal contributor behind Prometheus. We also make all kinds of other neat observability tools. As you all progress in your careers, you'll undoubtedly come across this stuff. And you should know there's actually quite a few Grafana people here in Louisville. So let's hop into it. So going to break this up into 3 sections. The are going to be actual concrete things I think are really valuable. And then we'll do a 3rd section on kind of more habits and practices that are maybe a little less actionable and more to think about. So our 1st section, planning ahead. Pretty simple. So whenever you get your day going, I think this is not atypical advice. You know, lots of people in the industry do a stand-up type thing, but just for yourself, even if you don't work in an agile type environment with stand-ups, it's really useful to take a few minutes every day and write down what you've got going on, what's next, and looking at it. And the idea here is, you know, make a document. It could be a notepad, Google Sheets, Google Docs, whatever works for you, just so you can kind of keep an eye on what you're doing and how long you think it's going to take. So it's This is really useful to make sure that you're not getting pulled back and forth and lets you keep momentum behind these tasks. And when you're looking at what you're going to do today and tomorrow, you really want to look and try to do some estimates. And especially in the beginning, this is going to feel weird. It's like you don't know how long it's going to take. Maybe the tasks aren't scoped well, but still try to put a number to it. And over time, you'll be able to narrow those down and get a good feel for how long something will take. And I think the biggest thing here, beyond just writing it down and have something to look back on, is don't overschedule yourself. And as you start working on your estimates, you're going to figure that out over time and figure out how much capacity do you actually have. This will go a long way to not making you feel so stressed out. So after you're done, you do this every day, you're looking through it, you make your list, you want to move on and, you know, think about your week. What do you want to get done this week? You know, again, this kind of also fits in some of the agile type methodologies where you might have sprints or some type of fixed interval. But even beyond that, this is useful outside those scenarios when you're just working on your own, working on Code Louisville and Code Kentucky projects. So think about, what are you going to try to learn? What are you going to try to get done? Look at your calendar and what time you have available, and be very realistic. You know, those meetings that might be on your calendar once you're in a role, it's like, do they actually stay to those times? You know, is that a 1 hour meeting or is that actually a 90-minute meeting? And how much time do you need outside of that to decompress or to focus again? So like, look at that and try to figure out, what are you going to achieve? And if there's things that you want to get done and can't, you need to start prioritizing. So what can you put off till next week? What has to get done? And put that in your list too. So this is, you know, whatever schedule you want to work on. I like to do this on Mondays and look and see kind of what I got coming up, and make sure I'm going to get everything done, so I'm not having to rush at the last minute because I missed something. And then on an even longer time scale, periodically, you know, monthly, quarterly, whatever works for you, you should be looking back and thinking, am I learning things? Am I where I want to be? And where do I want to go next? And how am I going to get there? And this is really useful when you're thinking about both advancing in just your skill set, but also in your career, and making sure you're hitting whatever milestones you personally care about, making sure you're keeping up with your course or a project. It's very simple, but if you get into this habit and get used to it, it only takes a few minutes to get through these things, but it really is useful to look back on and be able to plan ahead and do these things kind of intentionally. And it makes things much less stressful as you're, you know, dealing with all these different things that come at you, all your projects. It's like, it can be hard to stay organized, but if you can write it all down and have it to look back on, it makes life a lot easier. So now that we've been looking forward, occasionally you want to take all that you wrote down and look back at it. So this is a big one. For me, I like to look through my list of things for the day, and this is probably the biggest one that I've seen effective senior and higher engineers do. Is they made their list for the day and they looked back and went through it. You know, they weren't glued to their list all day. They just knew what they had in mind, put it down, and then looked back and saw what happened. Did they get to what they wanted to? Did something come up that kept them from getting to it? You know, did I think, oh, I'm going to spend 3 hours on this, and I am not 20% of the way through. I'm going to need a few days. You know, looking through this every day before I close the laptop really helps refine my estimations, informs what's next for me, and really just sets the tone for the next day, just to know what's going on. Similarly, how was your week? What did you learn this week? What can you do next week to make it a better week for you? It's like, you know, not every week is going to be stress-free, but over time, as you can start develop some planning skills and start working on these different practices you can put in place, it really can over time. It's like, okay, maybe I didn't have a good week this week, but you can look forward to the next. Like, I'm going to refine my estimations and make sure that I'm actually putting a better number on this and not feel so stressed out about trying to get it done. And of course, not so much career like before, but personally, how are you doing? Do you like what you're doing? Are you happy? Are you growing? Are you learning? Or do you feel stuck? And if you do, what are you going to do to get to that next stage, or to get out of where you feel like you're just stuck? And again, you want to write all these things down so you can reflect back on them later. Um, and it seems like it could be a lot to write down, but this is for me is a very simple. I just have a Google Doc that has been just going on forever, and I pin to it every day and make notes, and occasionally just set checkpoints and look back over the last few weeks and see if I see any trends and make some notes about, oh, I'm doing this good. Maybe this isn't going so great, putting it down. And then when I need help, it's really easy to ask my peers or my manager. It's like, hey, I've noticed these things. Like, we're always off in this way, or I'm struggling here. What can we do about that? Or I want to learn something new. I keep getting the same types of tasks and I want to grow. And having all this written down where you can reference back to it is really handy when it comes time for things like performance reviews or your one-on-ones with your manager. And you don't have to try to remember what happened 90 days ago. It's like it's just there written down, and you'll hopefully have summarized it periodically. So those are the concrete things. Now into the little bit more nebulous things that I've seen people do and picked up along the way. So say the first one is be adaptive. So no matter how much we plan, how much we prepare, things are going to go off the rails some and change. It's like we don't have perfect knowledge of everything, and we just need to be prepared. Whenever a project is laid out, whenever we do anything for the week, we all know things come up, and you just have to be ready to roll with the punches and just be aware that's going to happen and try not to let it stress you out too much. It's just the nature of what we're doing here, where things will constantly change. Alongside that, though, is you have to stay focused. So, yes, things are going to change, they're going to come along, but we need to try to still stay on our task and not be completely derailed whenever that happens. Now, a big one, especially at Grafana, is this: don't pretend to have superpowers, right? So, yes, things change, there are distractions. However, you have to recognize that and speak up sometimes when that happens. And the don't have superpowers means don't just force yourself to get it done. Try to stay on task. You can tell people, hey, I am working on this that I've been told is important and is a priority, and I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to try to focus on it. And so we'll have people all the time just turn off Slack for a few hours and book their calendar. I need some focus time. I'm just, heads down. It's just like study time when you're taking a course. Sit down, do your work, check in periodically, but, try to do things and not context switch absolutely constantly. Now, a little bit more fun, be curious. You know, Many of you are new to this and learning how to do software engineering for the first time, and it was hard to pick this up. But I can tell you that you're never going to stop learning, and you need to be experimenting and having fun and trying out new things all the time. And they're not always going to work. And sometimes you're going to try to go after something and you're not going to pick it up. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. You're still going to pick up something personally along the way. I mean, personally, I am just awful at math, and it isn't for lack of trying at this point, but I just know that about myself and just keep plugging away at it. And I don't let it discourage me. We're all good at different things. When it comes to learning, though, one of the fun parts about this industry is that you can build a foundation of basic principles once you can write one language. So once you can write JavaScript or C# or anything, you can more or less figure out something else. Like, yes, there's big differences between Python and C# and JavaScript. The tools are different, how you deploy them are different, but fundamentally, they're all the same. You have conditionals, you have loops, every web framework out there is more or less the same. It's like you already have some context once you know one of them. So even though, JavaScript frameworks, the jokes are, they constantly change. Like, hey, this new React library, and then this new React library, and then there's a new one 3 months later. It's like, I don't know how many React routing frameworks exist out there, but it doesn't really matter that there's new ones, because they all work more or less the same way, and you can pick that up and use it. So the biggest thing that you can pick up from, I think, the code you program they're going through are these fundamentals, And yes, you might start off in C sharp, but one day you might end up in a Java job. And it turns out those are pretty similar. And yeah, you'll have to pick up some things along the way, but it's not completely new to you. You'll just be, picking up the things that are specific to that ecosystem, but you'll have a huge head start. All right. Here's probably the hardest thing for most people is communication. So whenever you want to whenever you're working with a team or even just taking courses, you need to be as intentional as possible with your communications. So if you don't understand something, you need to speak up and ask. If you don't like what's going on or don't understand why a decision's being made, raise your hand and ask. If you need to have more understanding, ask people to explain more. And by and large, that's going to go over well. When you're on a team and trying to come up with a decision, you should participate, even as so many of you will be joining as junior members of a team. Just because you don't have as much experience doesn't mean that your perspective isn't valid. You never know when you're going to say something that's going to make someone that's much more senior stop and think, like, oh, I hadn't considered that approach. Or even just having them explain the rationale to you or the approach might help their understanding a lot more. And they might suddenly realize, I missed something. Like, thanks, you accidentally poked a hole in my idea, and that's really helpful. And at the same time, as you go through and are talking about these different aspects of the world, whenever it comes to a decision point, you should not just say yeah and go with it. You should positively or negatively agree or disagree pretty explicitly. Depending on the team that you work on, this can be a really big deal. So in the case of the team that I'm on, it's a very international team. In fact, currently I'm the only US member of my team. And so I'm the only person who has English as their first language, but we do all of our business and all of our discussions in English. And so one of the biggest things we do is when it comes to a decision point is we go around the room and make sure everyone is comfortable and not just shrugging and going along with it. And we make sure everyone understands and we're on the same page. And this is not always comfortable. Again, especially if you're a junior member of the team, it can feel strange to raise your hand and question what's going on. And you're not questioning them, you just want to understand more. And you should definitely do that. That's some of the most valuable questions I've ever gotten have been from someone who didn't fully understand what was going on, and just the act of bringing them up to speed really helped me bring things into focus and sharpen everything about what we were doing. Because if I couldn't explain it to the people who are going to be working on it, then how much did I really understand? All right. In the vein of decision making, strong opinions loosely held is a vaguely controversial statement, but it's meant with good intentions here. And also, there is a question mark after good, and we'll get to that. So as you join a team, you're working on projects, you have to talk to each other. And this is going back to the communicating clearly. This is one of those stressful parts of being an engineer. When you're working with a team, trying to come to an agreement about how you're going to do something, it can be difficult because you don't have all the time in the world. You don't have all the information. You can only make the best decision based on what's in front of you and what you know today. And so you have to work together and be very honest with each other. And when you're looking at different avenues to getting something done. So you must, I cannot stress how much things like evaluating these trade-offs aggressively is so important. And you have to do it without ego, because we all have our preferred approaches and have our own ways of doing things, but we have to come together as a team and talk about them and figure out what is the best decision we can make right now. And that is never fun, especially when we get really attached to a way of doing things and someone has a completely different way that we don't think is a good idea personally. But you have to sit down and work together. And one of them, I mean, one thing that has really helped me through my career is I am probably the biggest opponent to my own ideas. I will be my own devil's advocate all day long. And not, being attached to your ideas, being passionate is great, but you should also be ready to jettison them as soon as you figure out a better path forward. And you really never know where that's going to come from. And you should be excited for that. It's actually really interesting how often it happens when someone, that you don't often hear from raises their hand and says, I think I know how to do this. And it's something you never would have thought. I've been working on a tricky problem at work, and someone just dropped by today, and we've been working on this for 3 weeks. And they just left an offhand message, and it's completely changed the path of the project weeks in. And, some people probably be upset. It's like, oh, we lost that time. But on the other hand, it's very exciting to have a really interesting and productive path forward. And this last one down here, disagree and commit. So you're not always going to get your way. We're not always going to like what we're doing and how we're doing it. But we need to come together as a team, make sure we've gotten over all the obvious pitfalls that could jeopardize a project. And even if it's maybe not our preferred approach, we got to sign on and we got to get to work, because time is always against us when we're working. Yeah. And use what data you have. This is tough depending on what you're doing and where you're at. Coming up with data-driven decisions. There's whole fields of study on this. There's good parts and bad parts about it. And you should just use what you have, because you're never going to have all the data that you want. You can always ask more questions and wonder what people want or how they'd use it. But at the end of the day, you are going to have to pick an approach and get moving so you don't get stalled out. All right. So no bullet points for this one. This is pretty simple. Your ethics super matter, regardless of what industry you're working in. Doesn't matter what type of job you have. You need to not lose yourself. You need to do the right thing by your company, by yourself, by your team, and make sure you're comfortable with what you're doing. And this is one of those things. It's not always fun, but there might come a time where you need to raise your hand and say you're not comfortable with what's happening and how things are being done. I'm lucky that I've never had a serious situation like this, but it's something that should definitely be in your mind, depending on what industry you work in. And yeah, but it's at the end of the day, you want to make sure that, when you close your laptop, that you're happy with what you've done and are comfortable with it. And last one, make this pretty easy. Take care of yourself. So you need to take care of your family. You need to take care of your team. At the end of the day, this is all fun, exciting work, but it is work and can be stressful. And you need to watch out for things like burnout, right? It's like, it's very easy to get burnt out in this industry. It's like the projects never end. It's like there's always something next. That's why we're here. But you need to make sure to pace yourself, to be looking ahead, and make sure that you're still feeling motivated. You feel good about what you do, that you're doing things like getting good sleep, making sure to take good breaks. It's all the things you've heard. It's all the cliches, like make sure you get enough water, make sure you go for a walk. But it really does matter, because if you're going to spend hours and hours sitting in front of a computer typing, you need to make sure that you're actually taking care of yourself, because it is not always the easiest on you. It's like you can only spend so many hours a day in a chair before it starts hurting. So you need to get up and move around and make sure you're feeling good about what you're doing. All right. That's what I have for you all.
Thanks, Matthew. I think there was a lot of really good information in there and things that I've tried to be cognizant of. I like the last part about getting up and moving. I have my standing desk that I move up and down during the day, and I bought a little yoga ball recently to help with some back pain, so always helpful. If anyone has any questions, feel free to start throwing those in chat, or feel free to unmute yourself to ask, and we can field those. But Matthew, one thing that I really like that you were talking about is like continuing your learning and how you might end up on a different path. I know I've personally worked with a lot of students who studied like C sharp and then ended up at a company that was strictly Java and really had to adapt and learn that way. Do you have any tips for folks as they're embarking on this learning journey that probably already seems really, I guess, big and maybe kind of scary on how to learn a new language or how to really kind of jump in and not be afraid when they're in that situation?
I think that's the biggest one, is not being afraid, especially if you have learned something, if you've taken the giant leap where you can write something, you are most of the way there for anything you want to do. And it's not always obvious and it may seem scary, but that's been probably the biggest surprise in my career. I've been doing this for over 15 years, and the number of things that I've shipped to production in different languages is silly at this point. And I am a .NET engineer by trade. I've been writing C sharp for a very long time at this point. Oh, it's been a while. But last week I was writing documentation for PHP. Do I write PHP regularly? Have I touched PHP in over a decade? No, but it's fine. I have all the resources that anyone else learning PHP has. I can go out there and look at it. I can apply it and use the context I already have. Like, oh, this is like this thing I already know. And I've gotten plenty of jobs in languages that I did not know by being able to ask questions in the interview. It's like, is this like this other thing I already know? And getting into a discussion, like, oh yeah, we'll hire you even though you don't know Python. Sure. Like that's a-okay. You know how to write code. You're thinking about this the right way. And it's just having that mindset and just taking a breath. It's like doing some reading, doing a little bit of research and trying to understand what the differences are. I mean, there are things out there that are very different and hard. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if you start going out there and trying to write Haskell after you're writing C sharp all day, there's a learning curve that's you won't even recognize the syntax type situations. But for a lot of what we're doing, it's not that different. And you can pick it up very quickly. And it takes a while to get that confidence. But I mean, I would honestly just say if you're not sure if you can, just try it. If you're in one track and have completed it and are wondering, like, I wonder if I could go after a JavaScript job. There's no opportunity cost for you to just try it out and go look up some tutorials and see what you're getting into. Like, there's so many resources now. It's absolutely incredible what's out there. And even better, there's lots of people who are willing to answer your questions and help, not just in this program, but there's regional Slacks all over the place. I'm in a bunch of them. And the number of people that'll just post a question like, hey, I just started using AWS for the first time. How do I do this? And plenty of people will be happy to shoot you some links or directly answer your questions. Like, one of the neat parts about the tech community is that it is a community, and by and large, everyone's super nice and willing to help.
Absolutely. I think that's really great advice. And August from our team does a really good job of keeping the tech events channel in Slack populated. I would definitely recommend checking that out for some in-person and virtual events. That's great ways to meet new folks. And we usually share the Slack channels for other like community Slacks every so often. I'll add that when I post the recording for this one. I know there's a Cincinnati, a Lexington one that I'm a part of, Louisville, but lots of really great contacts we met that way. Matthew, can you just talk a little bit about kind of some of the maybe challenges or like maybe the biggest challenges you've seen with folks, whether it's coming out of Code U or just getting their first job in tech, kind of making that transition, and any sort of like tips that you have if they're coming from a really not tech background into a tech background?
I think the hardest thing that I've seen, so I've been lucky enough to hire a number of graduates from the Code U program, and they've all been really, really good. But the hardest part for them getting onboarded has always been things like, what is it like to deploy to production? What does continuous integration and continuous deployment look like? That's not something that's strictly necessary to get a job, And it's actually kind of hard to teach because every organization does those types of things so differently. And unfortunately, like deploying to AWS costs money. And so getting that experience outside of a job is no fun. That is, I mean, the Code U program does a great job of teaching people how to code. And the hardest part is just that next step of running things in production and getting that experience, which is, for always, it's getting that first job. That's always the hard part. Um, but without having to get a job, there's nothing stopping you from learning how GitHub Actions work. And the candidates that I favored the most have been the ones that have been curious enough. Like, they didn't have a reason necessarily to build their own GitHub Action pipeline, but they just thought it was neat and it was free and easy for them. And they started just getting that tickle. It's like, oh, that's how builds work when it's not just on my computer. That's how it'd be a little bit more professional. It's like I can build it over there and let it run tests. And the kind of just like the next stage of making a more mature project. And luckily there's a lot more resources, but just being able to talk about those types of things, or being able to talk about things like Docker or Terraform, so infrastructure as code, where you can describe what type of virtual machines you want, just knowing that those exist, even if you've never used them, and being able to talk about them and just being upfront, like, I've never used them, but I've read about them, will put you so far ahead of all the other candidates. It's not even a contest. It's, just, again, be curious, like, go out there and read about those things. If there's things you hear about in the industry and things that you see are common practices, or if you're wondering what common practices are, ask for some reading material. And I guarantee you there's lots of mentors in the Slack that can shoot you all kinds of reading material that will keep you busy, but will also be valuable in interviews. Like I said, I've talked my way into many jobs. Like, there's a point in time where I never deployed anything to AWS, and it did not keep me from getting the role because I had enough just base knowledge and context for it. They're like, okay, we can teach you the rest. And by the time I started there, I had like a 7-figure a month bill for my team. So there's a lot of trust. So they know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I had to laugh a number of years ago. This is probably 2016, 17-ish. I had a student who was finishing up the JavaScript class. They were like, like, I just don't know if I'm ready to move on. I don't think I know everything about JavaScript yet. And I was like, oh, my friend, you're never going to know everything about JavaScript 1, and especially not after just one course. So you're kind of in it for the long haul. If you're making the move to tech, there's a lot to learn. And I think for some people that's really scary, but I think for a lot of others and people that are really drawn to tech, it's exciting. There's just so much out there for you all to do, which I think is really cool, and lots of opportunities.
That's actually something that I really like about my particular role, is that I help people with their applications. So I help customers, and so I'm constantly learning things. And it's just like, I had no idea that was possible. Even with I've been writing C# since 2005, and I still learn new things on occasion that people can get away with. It's like it's really, it just gets it, it's just having a good attitude, and just turns out to be fun, honestly.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Matthew, thank you so much again for joining us tonight. I know it was really useful information for me, and I'm sure our students as well. As a reminder, we do have 2 more weeks scheduled out. We have a speaker next week, as well as March 11th. And then we have a couple already scheduled for mid-April. So keep an eye out for announcements on those shortly. But yeah, thank you all again so much for attending tonight. And we appreciate it. Have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.